All right. Well, we're here to talk about our groups ministry, and we have a groups pastor candidate that is going to be coming in soon for everyone to get to know. And John and I just wanted to go ahead of that with a video that we would do to talk about just our vision for groups ministry, because we want anyone who wants to know more about groups to be up to speed on kind of where we're going with our groups ministry, going into the forums with our groups pastor candidate. And we're really excited about him. John, you want to take a minute just to tell everybody about the groups pastor candidate and anything they might want to know?
Yeah, definitely. Really excited to introduce Nick Parker to you all. And you can go to efree.org/candidate and get all the information there. But as I've been spending the last year interviewing, we've probably had 80 applicants for this position. I personally interviewed 20 of them, had an interview team that boiled down 10 of them and went on a deep dive with them. And then Adam and Kevin, our pastoral team, we kind of went in with a handful of them. And Nick just kept coming up to the surface over and over again of kind of checking the boxes that we're really looking for. And one of the things that I thought was exciting as I talked to some of the candidates who are coming in, and then even talking to other pastors, especially during the pandemic. So we're looking for a candidate during a global pandemic when church is like really restricted. And I've heard so many pastors from other churches say, wow, we're just having a hard time keeping our groups going. And I've been really, really amazed and impressed and been able to share with other pastors that, yeah, we've slowed down a little bit, but for the most part, our groups have continued to go through the pandemic. And so as I shared that with Nick, he was really excited about that, to see that, you know, he's not coming in with nothing. He's coming in to be able to take the reins of a ministry, pull it together, some re-energizing and redirection, and to move it forward. And he's got marketplace background for organizational development, for seeing the structure of it. He's got an incredible story of how God just grabbed his heart and brought him into the kingdom and then into vocational pastoral ministry. So he really eats and breathes groups and discipleship. And so that makes him a really, really good fit.
Yeah, if you haven't already watched the video introduction to Nick and Casey that we sent out earlier this week, make sure you do that. We'll put it on efree.org/candidate as well, so that you can watch the video there. And they're a really neat family. Having interviewed some of the candidates that John is talking about, I kind of got to the point where you just get a little discouraged and jaded. And so I honestly entered into talking with Nick with a lot of skepticism, and he completely turned that around. So I kind of went in with a pessimistic outlook, and by the time I got done talking with him, I was really excited. So I think everybody else will be too.
Yeah, I think they're going to see, and I think you agree, Adam, that Nick brings, and I think the leaders in the church will see, a level of maturity that we need in this role. I interviewed a lot of guys that were like, really geared up and fired up, and they would come in and they would just be, going full guns. And then others that I think I would have to light a fire under to get to move. And Nick really he's mature, but he's got vision and he's got direction. And I think he's got what we need for our church.
Yeah, I think so too. So it's Nick, and Casey is his wife, and then Elle and Caleb are their two kids. So they'll be coming in doing some forums with us. You'll get to know them. But right now, what we want to do is talk more about the groups ministry in general, because we actually have a great strategy for groups. It takes some focused staff attention to really pull it off well and do a great job of it. And so we haven't seen it as fully implemented as we expect to in the near future. Certainly in a year and in a couple of years, we have big plans for what we want to see in our groups ministry, what we want that to look like in our church. And that's what we want to share with everybody right now. So, John, I wonder if you could just kind of give the big picture flyover of what is our vision for groups ministry at First Free.
Yeah, groups it's more than just a program. We don't want to just have another program, something else to do on a Tuesday night or on a Sunday morning. It's a discipleship platform. It's a place for us to be building disciples. And discipleship happens best in smaller communities, mid-sized, we would call them mid-sized groups, like a lot of our Sunday morning communities, or small home groups, or women's Bible studies, men's Bible studies, affinity groups. And that's where we can actually talk about life together. We can enter into life. And we've identified 4 areas we want every group to be involved in: growth, spiritual growth, community, building relationships, caring for each other's needs, and then serving. And that's what the church is really all about. And that happens in smaller groups where there's leadership, there's conversation, developing a vision for where we're going. And our goal, and we don't shy away from it, is we want everybody at First Free to be in a group somewhere. We want everybody at First Free not just to belong to our church as a whole, but to be known in a smaller community where they can serve, identify their gifts, find help when they need it, and really do church.
Yeah, groups need to be the hub for everything we do. And we were talking about this with our staff yesterday, how a large church with a great groups ministry is probably the closest thing to the early New Testament church. Because when people think about the early church, lots of different things come to mind. It might be the house church that's been popularized as, well, that's what the church looked like. But people forget that the members of each house church did not view themselves as just members of that church.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, all of the epistles in the New Testament are written to a church, or many of them, the non-pastoral ones, are written to a church in Crete, or a church in Ephesus, or a church in Rome, or a church in they had all these different churches: Philadelphia, Jerusalem, Antioch. And so there was a church, a regional church, that all consider themselves part of the same large church, usually 2 to 3, maybe 4,000 people in some cases. And then they had little smaller cells that were also called churches or house churches that were part of the bigger, broader church. They didn't view themselves as, well, I go to the church at so-and-so's house, and that's really different than the church at this other person's house. But they were all part of the same church. We've lost that over the centuries as there have been more and more schisms and fracturing. And, one day Jesus is going to come back and we're going to all be unified again, whether we like it or not. But when you have a large church with a lot of people in it, you can't really get to know each other on a deep, intimate level. And that's okay, because it was never the goal for that to be the place with hundreds and hundreds of people for you to get to know each other. It's supposed to be those smaller house groups. The Bible says that the early church in Jerusalem met weekly at the temple steps to worship God, but then met daily in people's homes to fellowship and have communion and spend more time together. So we want groups to be the hub of everything we do. There's a phrase that we borrow from other churches that says real church life happens in circles, not rows. And so that's not to downplay what happens in the auditorium. Obviously, I'm a big fan of what happens in the auditorium. And that's helpful to keep us all on the same page and growing around the same things in God's word and worshiping God together collectively, like that early church did together. But if we're looking to that auditorium gathering for all the stuff you mentioned, the care, the service, the growth, I left one out. What did I miss? Care, service, growth, community. Yeah, community. Mm-hmm. If we're looking to the big church to provide that level of intimate church life and connection, it's just not going to happen. There's too many people. And so we have to have those smaller groups. How are we doing today? And what would you like to see us improve now coming out of the pandemic? You said that compared to a lot of churches, we're doing well, and we're so thankful for our amazing volunteer leaders and all the people that participate in our groups. But what would you like to see us do over the next year coming out of the pandemic?
I think, and one of the reasons I think our groups have done well, maybe better than some other churches, is because the piece that feels really natural for First Free is the community piece. I mean, I think that's one of the anchors for our church is community, connection, friendships, deep friendships. And so that's kind of held well as we've gone through this. I think adding to that some of how are we doing at reaching out to our community? How are we doing at actually taking and inviting others who don't know this wonderful Christian community that we have and bringing them in, whether that's through service projects or taking that part of discipleship that is reaching out to others. And I think with everything going on in our world right now and in our society, it's not very realistic to think that people who don't think of church on Sunday morning are going to see big church as the doorway for life change or for a new understanding or a new perspective on things. It's going to be me going to my neighbor, or some people who are listening to this video going to their neighbor, our groups infiltrating their neighborhoods with the love of Jesus. And so it's that kind of intentionality that I'm looking forward to seeing. And not that it's not happening now. We have some really, really good things happening in our groups. But how are we building disciples? I think we need to be able to ask ourselves that, and to be able to say, how are we doing this year at building disciples compared to last year? And it's hard to measure because we're talking about life transformation, but we need to at least be thinking that way.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about the importance of groups in our church?
It's a wonderful place for people to find their place in the church. And we often hear, where do I belong? Where should I go? Where should I serve? And
how do I get connected?
How do I get
big
connected?
Church? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really the first step. And then the team can help you there.
Yeah, that's great. So how is this position different than other pastoral positions in the past at First Free? Because I didn't even realize until you shared with me recently that this is actually quite a bit different for us.
Yeah, at least in my tenure here and in what I've heard about previously, I don't know that we've had one pastor who's over all of these various kinds of groups. We've had pastors and directors leading men's ministry, women's ministry, home small groups, Sunday morning communities. But what we're doing here that is a little different, and even it's been interesting as I've been talking to candidates over the last year. They may apply thinking, oh, you're looking for a small group pastor, or you're looking, well, yeah, and more. So I think what's special about this is while we still will maintain the special characteristic of Sunday morning communities or of home small groups or men's ministry, this pastor is going to help build that structure and cast that vision. So all of those different kinds of groups are rowing in the same direction, that we're on the same team, that there's a connection and even a continuity of sorts between what's happening in Tuesday morning women's Bible studies and what's happening in someone's Thursday morning small group, that we're on the same team, we're moving together. That, to me, at least as far as I understand, is really, really the first time we have one person as a pastor looking at all that.
And that's really exciting for me because there is so much synergy in these different areas, and you don't want them to get too siloed where they kind of become their own kingdoms. Mm-hmm. You really want them to be working together. Mm-hmm. And so bringing them all under one ministry umbrella was the first step 3 years ago. And now having one dedicated pastoral position that's going to support all of them together, I think is going to be incredibly helpful to have your Sunday morning groups and your small groups and your men's ministry and women's ministry and other groups all kind of part of the same ministry, like you say, pulling in the same direction, is a really exciting thing. If you think about it, so much of the training overlaps. The mission, the goals, the objectives are very, very similar, even though there are some nuances between them. And then the support that's needed and the accountability and the leadership is going to be so similar that I think we're going to have a really thriving ministry where it's kind of like the rising tide that lifts all ships. Mm-hmm. And what we learn from women's ministry should benefit men's ministry. And what we learn from small groups should benefit Sunday morning groups. And all of these things should kind of help everyone do better at doing those four things: caring for each other, growing together, serving together, and being in community with each other. So I think it's really exciting what we're going to do here. And we want everyone to come out and be a part of the vote on May 30th. We want them to be a part of the forums the weekend leading up to that. There's an online forum. There's an in-person forum. You can get all the information about that at efree.org/candidate. But we also want you to get involved in a group, obviously. So, John, how can people get plugged into a group if they aren't already?
Yeah, the first stop is efree.org/groups. That's where we have a groups finder there. So if someone has the inkling of just going ahead and perusing our groups, you can do that there, or you can reach out and make contact with. There's a tab you can click to make contact with us, and we'll reach out to you and help you to find a group. If you, by the way, do find a group you're interested in and you click on that group, don't think that's committing you to that group. That leader is just going to call you and talk to you and say, hey, what are you looking for? Because we're all wanting you to be involved in a group. So efree.org/groups is the place to go. But if you know someone in a group, talk to them. Ask them about their group and see if there's room for you in their groups. Oftentimes it's the relational connection that's the best way to do that, but we're here to help you find the right place.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks for being here today and sharing all this good information.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
See you.